welcome everybody. I'm here with Brian Ashcraft. Brian, please introduce yourself and let the viewers know who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Okay. My name is Brian Ashcraft, and I'm a senior writer at Kotaku.com. I'm also a columnist at the Japan Times, and I've written several books about Japanese things or things related to Japan or things in Japan. And I've been in Japan for coming, 18 years now. I came here in 2001, and I live in Osaka.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I guess first what I want to say is what was your initial interest in Japan, and what made you decide to make Japan your home?
I've been interested in Japan since I was a little kid. When I was in maybe kindergarten or first grade, a couple of students, maybe one student moved from Japan and came to our class, and so the teacher felt like that all the other kids in the class should learn about our new friend or our new friend's country. And so maybe we spent about a week or two learning about Japan. And then we went to a Japanese restaurant in Dallas called Little Tokyo. It's gone. But I just remember as a kid it's the first time I'd ever had Japanese food. It was the first time I'd ever used chopsticks. And the staff at the restaurant took the paper that the chopsticks come in and kind of rolled it up, and then took a rubber band to make kind of pinchers for us out of the chopsticks. And I just thought I thought that was cool. And so I remember keeping those chopsticks. They're just wadi-washi. They were not, fancy chopsticks or anything, but I kept them for a long time after that and just being like, wow, this is so cool. And I just remember eating miso soup and thinking that I'd never had anything that tasted quite like that, and really, really liking how it tasted. So from that point, Japan was on my radar. And then when I was a little older, also in grade school, there was another kid who had moved from Japan, and he invited me over to his house once. And I just remember going over his house, and he had he had a Famicom, and I had a Nintendo, but he had a Famicom. And so I was just like, wow, what's this? This is like Nintendo, but it's it looks totally different. And, the games are all in Japanese and the cartridges are different. And so it was a bunch of things like that as a kid. And I just remember and then I invited him over to my house. And when we went to go pick him up, his parents, I guess, just felt really happy or something that he had made a friend. And when we went to go get them, I remember they got my parents a small gift as a kind of a token of appreciation. And in Japan, that kind of the gift giving culture is the norm. It's just how things are done here. But I just remember my parents being like, oh wow, they didn't have to do this. And I just had a bunch of experiences like that as a kid. Another neighbor was a flight attendant, and she flew DFW to Narita, so she was always bringing back Japanese snacks. So ever since I was a little kid, I was just, aware of Japan, and I found out that they played baseball, they play baseball in Japan, and there's all these things that's just seemed like an interesting place for me. And so when I finished school, the idea was oh, I'll just go for a little bit and I'll come back. Because when I was in college, I was interning in the movie business in LA. And so the idea was I'll go back and do that some more, do something like that. And I just ended up staying, and then I started getting writing jobs, and then I just ended up, staying here. So it wasn't I think it's the case with a lot of people. I think that maybe people kind of come here on a lark, and then for one reason or another, they end up staying. And sometimes people end up staying for a really long time. And I think that that's been kind of the case with myself, I know.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. I came here, planning only about a year, year and a half or two and end up staying. I'm here going on 11 years now as well.
Yeah,
So yeah, it happens, you know.
it
But
does happen. It does
yeah,
happen.
that's interesting. You say like you met this friend in you said Dallas, right? You grew up in Dallas, Texas?
Yeah, I grew up in
Yeah,
Dallas, and this was in this is the 80s. I guess
right.
this would have been the late 80s. And yeah, and so or I guess the first student that came over, I guess, came over in kind of the mid to late 80s, and then the other kid who came over during I think maybe when I was in fourth or fifth grade. So that would have been the late 80s. And yeah, I mean now, in Dallas, there are a lot more Japanese people because of Toyota moving
Right.
its North American headquarters there. But at that time, there weren't that many. Um, and so it was interesting because I would see lots of things that were very familiar, but then were, often kind of, had kind of a different spin on even like Coke cans. Like I don't know if you remember if you've seen Japanese Coke cans from the 80s. They're like
Yeah.
these very like thin cylindrical tall cans.
Right.
and
Right.
and so I just remember as a kid our friend who was a flight attendant should bring back Japanese and Sprite cans for us. I mean, they weren't like empty cans; they had drinks in them. But just getting them and like being like, wow, the cans are different. And then you drink the can, you drink the Coke or whatever. It'd be like, it tastes different. It doesn't taste. It probably tasted exactly the same. But it was just like, it was interesting because there were things that were very familiar, and then like our neighbor had like a pachinko machine in her house, and so you'd go over and like look at this pachinko machine, and you'd be like, what's
Oh,
this?
oh wow, really? Like they
Yeah.
actually they brought the pachinko machine over to America.
Yeah, this was just with the pegs. This didn't have like an LED like now they're,
Okay.
super high tech. This was like an old school. And so me and
That's
her son,
interesting though. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
me and her son would like sit there and try to play it and be like, I don't get this. Do you get it? No. And we just like, I mean, so there was like, it was always around as a kid. And I think for a lot of kids in the 80s as well, that's true with Japan. I think a lot of kids were exposed to Japan through video games or, Voltron, like, the Voltron toys that I had as a kid. I mean, they were
Right.
from Japan. They were like brought in, our neighbor would go to Japan and then buy the Voltron toys and bring them back and just like, wow, these are amazing. So there was just that kind of, innate interest. And then like, especially during probably the mid to late 90s, there was a lot of like kind of Japanese pop music that
Yeah.
became for like a hot minute kind of, there was like an article, I think, in like Rolling Stone about like, all the groups that were kind of coming out of Japan at that time. So there was a lot of things like that. Also, in the mid to late 90s, I was, when I was in college, I was interning at a movie distribution company.
Yeah.
And the company was the name of the company was Rolling Thunder Pictures. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was the president of the company was Quentin Tarantino.
Yes, yes.
He didn't run the company. The guy who ran the company day to day was named, or his name Jerry Martinez. And he had worked with Quentin back at the video store. And he was and is like super into Japan and into like a lot of Japanese movies from the 50s and 60s and early 70s. And so he was really into that. And I was hired to work on a blaxploitation book because
Okay.
they were shooting Jackie Brown at the time. And so
Right, right. Yeah.
so like I would either go watch them shoot Jackie Brown or kind of I would go. There was a clothing designer who had this. He lived in I think he lived in South Central LA, and I'd go down to he had this really amazing studio because he and his wife did a lot of very intricate tailoring or suit making. They made these beautiful bespoke suits,
Right.
and a lot of like NBA players and famous actors would go there because they just did fantastic work. And so sometimes I'd be in there like organizing posts. He he had or still has like one of the largest poster collections in the world of for Black cinema.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and so I would go down to studio, and I'd be in there like, just blown away by like a huge one sheet he had of maybe, really amazing movie. And then you'd walk out of the kind of the area where all those posters were, and you see like these like really well-known basketball players,
Right.
talking to him. So it was like, wow, this is, really interesting place. And so that first summer, I organized all these posters and went through his massive collection. He had a lot of the publicity material that the movie studios like AIP would or I guess American Pictures International, not AIP, but they would send to the movie theaters and tell them like, this is how you should promote whatever movie. And
Right.
so
Right.
I'd read through that, and that was really interesting. And I'd organize all the posters. And then on the other days, I would go watch them shoot Jackie Brown. And then my boss, who was really into like Japanese movies, he would like say like, let's go. They're showing, a bunch of Zatoichi movies or Baby Cart from Hell movies at the American Cinematheque. Let's go watch them. And so we'd go watch all these Japanese movies. And that summer, Fukasaku Kinji came, who directed Battle Royale, and he hadn't directed Battle Royale yet.
Right.
They were doing this big retrospective on him, and Sonny Chiba was there.
Wow.
And,
Wow. Cool.
Yeah, Fukasaku was like I mean, he's the guy that they brought in to replace Kurosawa on Tora. I mean, like he was
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, like a great director. And it seemed like at that time, like he's kind of at the end of his career, and they were just doing this retrospective. They were showing like Battles Without Honor and Humanity and like all this stuff. And so because of the company that I was interning at, like, I got to like, meet these people and have dinner with them and talk to them. And so there's just all this, we'd go to these like special dinners. I don't think it's called the Japan Foundation, but there's something like the Japan Foundation in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
and to like promote Japanese culture. So we'd go to dinners there, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And then my boss that same summer, came to Japan to try to get the rights to, I think, one of the newer Gamera movies that Steven Seagal's daughter was in, and something else. I think he tried to get maybe Battles Without Honor and Humanity. Tried to get the rights to those, but they couldn't get the theatrical distribution rights to those. But he came back and he's like, wow, Japan's really great. And so I was like, okay, I should go. And so I decided to go, and thought I was going to stay a little bit, and just ended up, forever. So
Yeah. Wow. That's a very interesting history there. So, like, you got how'd you get into writing, and two, like, how did you get into like working for Rolling Thunder? Because like I mean, personally, I'm a huge Tarantino fan myself, and I know a little bit about his interest in cinema and his background a bit, and like that must have been, like, to be honest with you, I mean, I think Jackie Brown is actually one of his most underrated films. Like, that's one of my favorite films of his, is Jackie Brown, and that must have been really cool to be like there when it's being filmed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like I tweeted
Yeah.
this out recently. There was like Robert Forster passed away recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Robert Forster was like in Medium Cool. If you've never seen Medium Cool, please see Medium Cool is amazing. It's just like it's part documentary, it's part fiction. It's putting actors in the middle of like real protest. It's incredible. So it's an incredible movie. And the guy who directed it was a really famous cinematographer named Haskell Wexler, and it just looks fantastic. It's a really cool movie. And Robert Forster was this really great actor, but his career never quite popped, exploded the way it should have.
Right.
And he brought him in to do the Max Cherry role in the movie. And like, I'm just some like dopey like 18 or 19-year-old kid who's there like just to like organize movie posters and like answer the phone and transcribe interviews. You know, I'm not even like a PA on the movie. You know, I'm like
Right.
nobody of nobody. You know.
Yeah, you're just starting out, right?
It's like I'm nobody. I'm like basically I was just there, like just sitting there, like watching people getting in the, you know, just trying not to get in the way.
Right.
And he was so friendly. He was so nice, and he was thrilled to be there. And you could like he would talk to you, and you could go up and ask him questions about movies he had been in, and he was just like, you know, when you go to they do the dailies at the end of the day, and they'd show some of the footage that they shot, and like when you would leave, he would like come up to me and say like, thanks so much for coming today, it was great to see you. You know what I mean? And it was just like, I'm just like some kid, you know, like you don't have to, you know what I mean? I'm nobody. He just was an incredibly good guy.
Right.
And he was thrilled that he was giving that chance, and he was nice to everyone. Everyone liked him. He was not, you know, he was just nice to everyone on the set. Just a super great guy. And so in the making of the Jackie Brown, maybe in the DVD extra, they have like a making of documentary, and there's a scene where like Quentin's like walking through the Del Amo Mall on the set, and Sam Jackson's kind of milling around, and I'm like talking to Robert Forster, and I was just like, there I am, you know, like you can like this kind of like geeky kid with my boss, and we're like talking to him, and I just like I just felt I felt really happy that he was able to kind of get this you know, second wind in his career, and just ended up, you know, having a great later career doing a lot of stuff. But I was like, when I heard that he passed away, I was like, oh, that's really sad. Because there was a lot of like really big stars on the set. You know, it's like, you know, Robert De Niro's kind of milling around, and then I kind of felt like, what am I going to say to Robert De Niro? You know,
exactly, right?
It's like it's just too intimidating. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean that cast was amazing. You had Robert De Niro, Sam Jackson, Michael Keaton, Bridget Fonda, right?
Yeah.
You know, Robert Forster's there, and then you have, you know,
Chris Tucker, like all these people.
Yeah. I mean, that would have blown my mind to be around all those people. To be honest.
Yeah. And so Robert Forster was nice. Like Sam Jackson was nice. Bridget Fonda was super nice. I mean, everybody was super nice. But you know, it's like I kind of felt like you know, because you see, like I'd say De Niro is a great actor. Robert Forster is a great actor. You know what I mean?
Right.
And De Niro is somebody whose career just kind of, you know, obviously took off, and he was able to bring all these amazing characters to life. And then you look at Robert Forster, and he's this brilliant actor, and his career never quite was never. I mean, it obviously wasn't like De Niro's, but
exactly, yeah.
But like, you know, Robert De Niro was like the super professional guy and this great actor, but it's like, what would I say to Robert De Niro kind of thing. And then Bob Forster is, you know, walking around, he's very friendly, and you can talk to him, and it's like you could ask him about Medium. Like I had a bunch of questions about Medium Cool, and so he was just really nice. So it was a good experience. The thing that kind of like stayed with me for that you know, that experience was that at the beginning of the summer, you know, the way I got that job is I'd gone a year before and had worked at like an agency, like a talent agency.
Yeah.
And they basically handled some writers. Some of the writers there were like friends with Quentin. And one of their biggest client was this guy named Mardik Martin. And he co-wrote Mean Streets with Scorsese. And Raging Bull and stuff.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of at the end of his career, and basically I think teaching at USC at that time. But sometimes you'd like call in and want to speak to the main agent there, and be like, wow, it's Mardik Martin. And, you know, he co-wrote Mean Streets. So, but it was through somebody in that company that kind of recommended me to Jerry, my boss, and they were like, this kid knows a lot about movies. And so, you know, since Jerry worked at the video store with Quentin, that was kind of like does he? And so he called me up and like was like, who are your 5 favorite directors? What are your 10 favorite movies like this?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
right.
And they were like judging my taste. You know what I mean? It's like, oh,
Oh man.
I'm a really big Preston Sturges fan. I'd say stuff like that, and they'd be like, oh, I like
Yeah.
Preston, and like, I really like Andre de Toth, or Sam Fuller is a great director. These like super nerdy kind of film
Exactly.
geeks.
Like the ones that, average people would be like, who's that, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
anyone who's into cinema, you kind
You
of
would
know who
know.
these people are. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and their big kind of bent was that like the whole point of that whole studio was that like um like a lot of like quote unquote like let's say film school students. I mean, this is kind of we're speaking in platitudes and stereotypes. This isn't entirely true, but this is what was kind of conveyed to me. They might say that like Fellini is a great Italian director, but Fulci is not.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so they would, that distribution company would kind of look at Fulci as this, and he is, I mean, this fantastic, amazing Italian director, this Italian filmmaker. So, at the beginning of that summer, though, I had seen maybe like, like I'd seen like Shaft, I'd seen like one or two blaxploitation movies. And so every day I would watch about, at least one or two blaxploitation movies, like every day.
Right.
And then I'd be going through this enormous catalog of like posters and all this like promotional material. So you're learning, you're looking at the art, seeing all the taglines, kind of getting a feel of how artists visualized or conceived of this moment in film history. And then you see how the studios are promoting it. Like they're like, it was ridiculous. They'd say like, get mannequins and spread them all out over the lobby and put ketchup on like them like they'd been shot. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
You'd be reading,
yeah.
you'd be like, this is, I don't like, okay, and then there was the interviews. So I'd be calling up people to set up interviews, the great, a lot of the great stars and actors of this period, like Rudy Ray Moore. Like Rudy Ray Moore is getting a big, he's because of the new Eddie Murphy movie. He's it's a shame that he's not here to see this, but he's getting his legacy is getting a big boost because of the Eddie Murphy movie. But like I'd call Rudy Ray Moore's people and set up like an interview with Rudy Ray Moore, and then he'd like call me back, and it's like pick up the phone and it'd be like, hi Brian, this is Rudy Ray Moore. It's like, and I just remember I was like, wow, this is like Dolomites on the phone. This is amazing,
That's yeah,
it was
that's
nuts.
great. That's
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah.
So some of the interviews, they'd kind of, let me ask a few questions, but a lot of it, what I was doing was just transcribing it. So I was able to see, like, this is a good way to do an interview to get somebody talking a lot. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
right.
I was able to, by like transcribing, I could kind of see how, like, just how the interview flew, the flow of the interview, and then kind of the points, and then it was just helpful, to really kind of get in the nuts and bolts about that. And then, by the end of the summer, I'd, done all this research. I'd seen all these movies and stuff. I started to have like an opinion about these movies and which directors I liked and which stars I liked and that kind of thing. And so it showed, and this is kind of something that still sticks with me today. It kind of showed me, like, if you're going to do a book on something or you're going to research something, you really have to go all in. You can't if you're going to do a book on like tattoos, then you need to like, I'm going to read every single tattoo book that I can about Japanese tattooing, about, American style tattooing, like read every single thing I can, read every interview I can. And then I'm going to read like another like 300 or 400 more books about cultural things, and just you come up with this massive reading list of like 800 books or something, just silly, and you go through them all, and then you interview all these people, and then you go to all these studios and you talk to all these people, and by the end of the process, you know what you're talking about, and that, you know it, you know what I mean? And so that summer,
you just go down the rabbit hole pretty much.
You do, and you it becomes a question of like, how deep do you want to go, you know? And that summer taught me that. And that was, you know, it's weird. It's like, cause at that time I was like 18, 19 years old. Independent cinema was like the big thing. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll like, you know, go make movies or write movies or something like that. And like a friend of mine at that time was an editor. He won an Oscar after that, but just a really, really great editor. And I was like, maybe I'd get like a gig with him, or, you know, thinking like I could go somehow into production. But looking back, you know, in hindsight, that summer taught me how to do research and taught me, and that just kind of carried, and that was the skill that I learned that just transferred over into what I do now. And I didn't know that at the time. You know, I didn't know what I was, you know, that I'm doing now, that I would end up doing that. But it just ended up kind of just sliding over. And, you know, I was able to see a book made, how a book was put together, like all these kind of skills that, you know, I thought I was going there to learn how to do movie stuff, and I ended up learning how to do book stuff. So it worked out in a really, really good way, you know.
That's fascinating. That's really cool. Like, I that's really, really fascinating that you were able to kind of get into that world, you know, and just the whole independent film scene, you know, and research that. No, you say that you dealt a lot with the blaxploitation films, right? Did you ever meet Sid Haig at all?
Sid Haig was on Jackie Brown on the set. I wasn't there. I wasn't like, you know, I'm like, you know, I like Spider Baby. I'm like a big Sid Haig fan, you know. Like, no, I never met Sid Haig, but he was there on the set. I would have loved to have met him, but
he's another one that unfortunately passed this year too. So
I did not get to meet him, but he was, you know, like, what was the name of it? He did this one movie. Oh, what's the name of it? Oh, let me see. Hold on, if I can.
He played a lot of like heavies in the blaxploitation genre back at the 70s.
but before that, he did a movie. Before this movie was nuts. It's like a car racing movie, and they were like going around in a figure eight, and like they would like smash into each other in the middle of the. it was like.
What year did the movie come out?
This was like the early 60s.
Or the early 60s, right?
I forget the name, but I just remember seeing it.
It was like Pit Stop or
Pit Stop. Yeah, I think it was Pit
That's
Stop.
it. Yeah. He did a lot of films like that in the 70s, or in the 60s, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean that would have been cool if he was someone that I'd always wanted to meet someday, you know.
It was like the person that I was able to meet, the person I was like, wow, this guy, you know, is just a great director, was Jack Hill.
Yeah.
And he had a string of like these, just like he did like all these exploitation movies, and he just did them like they're just so incredibly well made and well directed, and just you know, he was operating at this I think this really high level. And I think that for him, he probably looked at like folks like Bogdanovich, who started out doing exploitation movies, but then were able to make the leap, or even Scorsese as well, the leap into like kind of mainstream cinema. And he never did that, you know what I mean? So and it's just weird how, like, you know, if you know, you study a lot of these great actors and these great directors, and you study their careers, and it's like if you know, for whatever reason they weren't able to get that one project to kind of push them in an entirely different direction. And so that was something I thought was like fascinating, you know. So it was an interesting time. It was a great time in American cinema.
Sure was. Yeah.
I just remember like the thing that kind of just really just resonated with me was that, take somebody like, you know, Bogdanovich. Bogdanovich knows so much about American cinema. He was friends with, John Ford, and like knew all these old directors and stuff, and interviewed them extensively. And like Tarantino can match him, pound for pound on American cinema. Now
Right.
he wasn't friends with John Ford, so he can't say, what it was like hanging out with John Ford, but he knows as much, and it's just incredibly in depth on the films, like all the way up and down kind of the credit list. He knows who everyone is. Plus, he knows all the American exploitation movies, all the Italian, the Italian horror movie, like all these other genres as well. He knows equally as deep. And that was the thing that, you hear people say that, and then you see him in action just kind of rattling stuff off, and you're just like, I don't know how he keeps it all in his head. I mean, it's just the
Right.
amount of even like people that I knew at that time that really knew cinema, and I would be blown away by them. They ultimately would be blown away by like all the stuff that he knew. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it was an interesting time. Yeah.
It's always cool to meet people that just have that library of knowledge about things like that, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. He is doing exactly what he should be doing. He should not be doing anything else, kind of thing.
Right. Right. Right.
I don't know what else he could. Well, he probably could be like an archivist or a historian or something like that, without a doubt. But like he found the right field at least.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
After you left that, how did you make the decision to move to Japan and just sort of continue on? Like, what led you to first move there and then like sort of decide, well, I'm just gonna kind of stay here and see how it goes?
so like that whole summer there was like all that stuff, and so I was like I should go, and so I decided I'd just go for a little bit, and then like the plan was kind of to come back, and then so I ended up staying, and then 3 months turned into 6 months, and 6 months turned into uh, you know it just continued, and then then I met my wife, and then I was like, she seems pretty cool, and
Mm-hmm.
so then we got married, and around that same time, a friend of mine from Dallas, he knew somebody that he went to UT with, who was an assistant editor at Wired magazine,
Okay.
and they were like looking for a stringer for stories. And so he said, like, if you ever have any kind of like tech related stories, send this guy an email. So I was watching like some super late local Osaka television, and they were introducing a keyboard for computers that was shaped like a cell phone. And this was for teenagers who were so used to typing on their phone that they were unable to use keyboards.
Wow.
This was
Okay.
this
Hmm.
was a real product. This was sold at Yodobashi Camera. This was a real product. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is interesting.
It was like
So
what, early 2000s, right?
yeah, '03. This is
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
'02, '03 around that. So I sent him a message, and they were like, oh, this is interesting. Do you want to write, 120, 150 words on this? And I said, all right. And so I didn't have a computer at that time, so I actually wrote that whole article out on my phone, like an old, clam. And it wasn't even a clamshell, I don't think. It was like a kind of a brick phone, whatever. And I typed that out and sent it in. And then they asked me if I wanted to write something else. And I just kept sending them ideas like every month. And, slowly but surely, I was doing an article almost every month. And they were all like, 150, 200, 300 words. And then those articles turned into 500 or 800 words. And then I started getting jobs at other magazines, like
Hmm.
other Condé Nast, and I got a contract at Wired, and I became like a contributing editor there, and I became a contributing editor at other magazines as well. And
Now was this Wired .com, Wired Japan. Right.
Wired magazine. This was the
Okay.
print.
Okay.
There now, I think there's, at that time there was a much kind of more. I think the magazine, obviously the magazine and .com have different editor-in-chiefs.
Right.
But the print was kind of like, then like print was very much it's still very much its own world, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this is before blogs took off, before online media took off. So, I remember like I do, not for Wired, but for another magazine, I do like tech reviews, and they'd say like, okay, go get this camera. And I'd call up the company and say, we need this camera to review it. The company would say, well, we're not going to send you the camera. The camera is, expensive, or it's hard to get, or whatever. And then I'd email my editor, and he would go, oh, just buy it.
Right.
And then keep it. You know what I mean? In case you want to write about it again or something like that. So like, it was a very different time. They had like, you could make good money. I don't know what you can make now writing for print magazines, to be honest, because I don't. I've done some stuff like recently, but and the paychecks were good. But like at that time, it was like they were expensing a lot of stuff that I don't know if they would expense now. Kind of. It was a different time.
Yeah, back then, in order to make kind of a name for yourself, you kind of just had to get the product yourself, review it, and then say, "Here's my review," right? They wouldn't just freely say, "Hey, we want you to," you request to review the product, and they just send it to you. Nowadays, it's that's very common, for YouTube channels or whatever, to get free products to review, just to sort of advertise the product,
No, so they would usually companies often send out review units. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like let's say you want to review a television or something like that. They'll send you the review unit that's dedicated for the press. You know what I mean? And they'll then the press can, this is I don't know how online works. I don't know how YouTube works. I'm just talking about like 04, 05, 06, like print.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they'd have kind of like the review units, and then after you review it, then you send it back to the company. You know what I mean? And so sometimes, because it was an American magazine, and the American magazine wanted to review Japan-only products, the Japanese, there was a big wall between, a lot of these big Japanese companies, between the US side and the Japanese side.
Right.
And so if you contacted the Japanese side and say, we want to review X, Y, or Z, they would say, well, that product isn't scheduled for release in the United States, so we can't send you a review unit. And you would say like, well, I'm based in Japan. The point of the article is to review this, and we're talking how it's Japan only. This is the point of the article. Nobody can buy it, but we just want to like explain what it's like, or its features, or blah, 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 blah. And more often than not, they just say like, no, it's just sorry. I think maybe now it's different. There's probably less of this. I think there's a lot more simultaneous global launches on stuff, especially like a lot of tech stuff. But then it was different. It would be like cell phones or digital cameras or just kind of stuff like that. And so, I'd say to the publication that was, this wasn't Wired, this was another publication. I'd say to them, and they'd say, oh, you can just get it and expense it and, review it that way, or and then just keep it, keep it and then review it later, or send it to us. Sometimes they'd want to see it or something like that. So that's just how it was at that time. I don't know what it's like now, but that's what it was like at that time.
Okay.
So it was just like building up like a series of clips, like you're doing like, I was writing about all sorts of stuff. I wrote about like an article about Japanese dog houses. I wrote an article about Horieimon, who was, he's still this famous IT guy, but at that time.
Right. Yeah. Cause that time he did what was it? Live door? Was that? Yeah. And then he had some sort of a scandal, right?
Yeah, he went to prison. So I interviewed him before that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You have interviewed him? Okay, because I read a few of his books and I enjoy his writing, but yeah.
He was pretty interesting. So I interviewed him like kind of when he was at the height of his I went to like Onomichi to see him run for office, and I was there on the last day where he lost, and so I was like just building up like a series of clips, and then then I started doing a couple features for them and features for other people, and then around that time, another editor at Wired then recommended me to what was then Gawker Media, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And I got the job at Kotaku, and so I started doing that in '05.
Yep.
And then it's just like kind of, at that time, like Kotaku was not, now it's, it's a really big site and we have millions and millions of readers, but at that time it wasn't. So it was just really just grinding out articles, every day. And I think at that time, 05, 06, 07, 08, people were still trying to kind of figure out how to do it, how to get it right. So
right. That was sort of like the genesis of the video game journalism thing. Like like sites like IGN had been around for a few years at that point, but mid 2000s was sort of when that's when like Xbox and PS2 and these systems were just really taking off, and like that was when video game journalism was just starting to explode, right?
Yeah, I mean there's a bunch of, there's like One Up and there's all these great magazines and stuff at the time, but like kind of the digital, like we would, like now it's like people kind of forget this, but if there's like for example, I went to Konami had a press conference when they were showing off the first gameplay footage of Metal Gear Solid 4, and so I took the train to, I think it was in Roppongi, and like it was in a movie theater. I just remember we went into this like huge movie theater, and Kojima's on stage, and there's some guy playing through it, and they're just playing it, and it wasn't like streamed anywhere. They were just like playing it for like people. So like you would like live blog that. Do you see what I mean? So it was like all these kind of like, we'd go, you'd have to go to these press conferences, and because it wasn't like hooked up, now it's like, just watch it on YouTube and everybody can see it.
Exactly. Yeah. Streaming wasn't really a big platform then. So
yeah, they just didn't have, it just wasn't, like I remember I went to, I was at one press conference and somebody I knew who worked at Gizmodo had a camera, like a live streaming camera on his head. And I was like, what's that? And he's like, this is for Justin TV.
Yeah. Yeah. Justin TV. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm streaming this. It's all live now. And I just remember like seeing them like, wow, okay. That's Twitch now, they became Twitch,
yeah, so, pretty much. Yeah. Twitch. Yeah.
So it was all, this was before like really before like Twitter and social media. So it was just a really different time, but it was an interesting time to get started. And it was interesting to see, it's just interesting. It was interesting to see it, to go from the PS2 to the PS3, and obviously, and the Xbox 360, and just to be there, see the Wii. So it was a really great time. So yeah, that was, that's how I got that job. And so I just, everybody at the site and everybody now, like, worked really hard and still works very hard. So it was interesting. It was really, really interesting. And it was it's been great to see how all these things have changed. And now if you look at it, like you think about it, you look at stuff from like 05 or 06.
Yeah.
I think it was like a billion years ago, so
it is, like you look at game, I was looking at game footage from even 15 years ago, which is around that time. And, with mods and everything, things look somewhat, I wouldn't say similar, but, resolution is obviously higher, but, like games have changed just so much just in the last 10 years that it's just, it's phenomenal at the rate that they're going, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. And you just think about what's the next 15 years going to be like, and
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so it's been great. It's been great to see. It's been great to see. Just it's been really interesting. I think this period, the last 15, 20, 25 years in video game history is just incredibly important, and it's been interesting to interview a lot of these people who make the games and just kind of see see how things have changed and evolved, and I honestly cannot really imagine what the next, I don't want, to be fair to video games, I don't want to imagine, what the next 15 years, are like, because I couldn't imagine that we'd go this far in the past, in the last 15 years. So
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
So I'm just excited,
Yeah, it is exciting, and just seeing some of the things that are just coming out in the next year or couple of years is really fascinating to me. I mean, I when last time I went back to the States, I was able to experience like full immersion VR arcade style things like the Void and arcade things where you interact with your friends in a
Right.
VR setting, and this is honestly, this is the future of gaming. I think is that this real life interactive VR experience.
I think that's the future of arcades. And so,
Yeah.
I read something recently that said, was talking about how, how the number of arcades in Japan have just how they've fallen in the past several decades.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that arcades have always done in Japan is that they've always tried to offer an experience that you can't get at home.
Right.
And I think that especially in Japan, I think that even if your home or your apartment is still on the large side, or your living room is still on the large side, it's still usually not like the best place to do VR.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. That is absolutely right.
And then usually in Japan, we just have one television in the house, so there's kind of that as well. Like maybe people want to it just depends, so or the space or whatever. So I think that I think that anyway, like so like for example, like when they had like motion, games with like motion in it,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that I always kind of felt like that was like a really interesting kind of idea as well. But then like for home use, it's still not exactly the most ideal place, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that arcades in Japan, any way that they can kind of offer a different experience, or offer something that you can't get at home, that's kind of, and so in the past, like, so for example, in the past, I think in the past 10 years, like people in Japan, the TVs that they would have at home, like the one TV that they have at home, wasn't as high def as some of the monitors in arcades. So
Right.
then that became like kind of like, do you want to play the new Tekken fighter? Okay, well, you could play it at home on your like one television, and it might not, it might not be as high def as the monitor in the arcade. Or even before that, like kind of the shooters, like a lot of the kind of the bullet hell shooters, like you can't, I guess you could flip your TV at home, but you know what I mean, like the screens are kind of turned on their side, so it's just
Yeah.
it's kind of a different, it offers you a different experience than what you would think you could get at home. And then even before that, when they had the graphics were just better in arcades. So there's just been this long history of of arcades trying to offer something different, whether it's that's like
Yeah.
a deluxe cabinet, a big cabinet of, you feel like you're, driving a car or, flying a plane or whatever. And so when I think about like now, how, when you look at the Japanese living room and you have the single screen, and then what's something that you could offer people, outside, people could play, VR at home. They can obviously play on a headset, so they can kind of detach from the screen or whatever. But it still doesn't quite like. It's not the same as, for example, if you're playing a VR multiplayer game in a large room where you have staff monitoring to make sure nobody like gets hurt or fall. You know what I mean? That kind of arcade experience, or that kind of, well, it's not so much art, but that kind of experience is something that you can't get at home. And so when I look at like Japanese arcades, you see kind of like Namco Bandai really kind of moving this direction and opening arcades that are offering this experience. And I think that for the arcades that remain, that kind of seems to be like a way forward,
Right. Now, could you, I mean, you say this, so, I've only experienced, arcades like the Void in like, I know Dallas has one that I experienced recently. And then I was in Denver and I experienced a VR arcade. Are these starting to pop up in Japan as well, like VR specific arcades?
Namkai Bandai is like Bandai's like opening them and stuff like that. So it's starting to, it's interesting, maybe about a decade plus ago, like Namco would have like in the Namco game centers would have like areas, they'd have like miniature, almost like haunted houses or like stuff where it's like, it's kind of like a game. There's like a game element of it, but it's still kind of like this like haunted house carnival attraction kind of thing. This kind of where it's the same kind of idea in a way where they're like, you can't do this at home. Somebody might be willing to pay $6, $5, whatever, to experience this. They might be on a date, and then they can kind of, like they'll want to do this if they're on a date or with friends or with whatever. So that's what we kind of need to focus on. So VR seems like a much, I have 3 kids. To be honest, like a lot of VR stuff at home, like I'm worried that like, kids gonna like start like trying to like screw around with me while I'm playing it, just to, what I mean? Like, but because it's like, what's daddy doing with that headset on, kind of thing, so but if you're like in a kind of an environment that is conducive, I mean, obviously if you live by yourself, it doesn't matter, but so I think that I just feel like that seems like a way forward. It seemed like before, kind of the way a lot of arcades were going is like a lot of the kind of the near field communication games, the card games, like the soccer games and stuff like that, or like Idolmaster and these other kind of card-based games. That was kind of like they were saying like, this is kind of what we should be doing. And I think it's all on the same. It's always the same kind of like, what can we offer that they can't do at home, and then they just do it. So VR just seems the latest evolution of that. So
yeah. So what would you say is your home console of choice? Which one do your kids play? Which one do you play? Or are they the same, or are they different?
I mean, I think the last generation, I played a lot of Xbox 360. And this one is just because I live in Japan. It's just harder to get Xbox One stuff. It just is.
Yeah.
So it just ends up being PS4 stuff.
Yeah.
Or is the Switch. Like my middle son is like absolutely obsessed with like Fortnite. So
yeah.
He plays a lot of that. Play a lot of Mario, stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's kind of the. I think probably this generation, that's pretty much everyone's. Well, unless you're really into PC gaming or, you have a really nice if you have a good PC setup, is that kind of that like 1-2 punch of the PS4 and the Switch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just the way it kind of next generation. I mean, the previous generation it was different. This is how it is this generation. Who knows how it's going to kind of shake out the next one. So that's kind of
Right.
Where I am now.
Right. Cool. So, Brian, you said you have you've written a few books, right? You have a new book coming out soon, right?
Yeah. So, last year I did a book on Japanese whiskey.
Okay.
So, visited a whole bunch of distilleries and interviewed a whole bunch of people. And I think the thing that's really interesting about Japanese whiskey is that it's kind of like, what is Japanese about it?
Yeah.
It's the process. The basic process is the Scotch whiskey style. The vast majority of grain that's used to make Japanese whiskey is imported. They don't use much domestic grain.
Mm-hmm.
The casks are going to end up coming obviously from Europe or the United States, and so then you kind of are left with, them. What's Japanese about? How is this Japanese? And so that was a really interesting. I mean, it was really, really interesting. It was really interesting to travel all around, to interview all these people, interview a lot of people that had never been interviewed before. People that like, for example, when you visit the Yamazaki distillery,
Mm-hmm.
there's a famous photo that you'll see a lot in the distillery. It shows kind of like a lake, and you see kind of a lake in the foreground, and then you see the distillery. And when you go on the tour of the Yamazaki distillery, they take you into the maturation warehouse, and you kind of come out, and there's a little pond there. It's a very small pond, and that's kind of like the end of the tour of the distillery. And that pond is completely man-made. There's a faucet, not a faucet, but there's like water piped in there, and it's not a natural. I mean, it doesn't exist there. They created that,
Right.
And so you kind of think like, but before there was like a lake, there was like a larger lake, and then they had the older. I mean, obviously they rebuilt they built the distillery now that they have is like a newer building than that's in the photo, and you're like, well then, why is there this pond there, and what is that? So we found this woman who's she's I think she's in her early 80s now, and she grew up on that other side of that pond, where that fake pond is right now. That's where her house was.
Wow. Okay.
And her family then sold that land to Suntory. Suntory bought it. They built a larger maturation warehouse, and then they built that little tiny fake pond that you see. And her family was living in Osaka City during the war. And her family was like, well, this is, we could get bombed in Osaka City. Let's move out to the countryside. There were people that moved out of the city. They, if their family lived in rural areas, they'd move in with their relatives, and they built a house there. And their house right across the way, when she stepped out of her house in the morning and looked across this small pond, there was the Yamazaki distillery. And she said that it was like a big kind of like, almost like a cultural shock to her, because she said they went in this like rural area and people were wearing kind of like these like straw sandals there. And she's like, I never wore that in Osaka City,
Mm-hmm.
And I think then her family realized that distillery had then been co-opted into the war effort.
Right.
So that distillery could be bombed. Because it became a war factory. They were making, some of it, they're making a percentage of alcohol for the soldiers, but you could get some of like the alcohols then could be used for other things part of the war effort. And she said that she just remembered like seeing like bombers flying overhead and like thinking like, wow, this was like a really bad decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was like when you go to the Yamazaki distillery, you kind of go on a tour, and they have their version of the history of the distillery. And what I really wanted to do was kind of like, go deeper, really kind of uncover stuff that had never been written about. Talk about Japanese whiskey in a way that I hadn't seen written about. So that was like a multi-year project, and went all over the place. And it was really, really interesting, and really tried to pick down like what is Japanese about Japanese whiskey. And then the latest one has been a book on sake.
Okay.
And so that's been another like multi-year project. I've visited a lot of sake breweries. I mean, like not a few, I mean a lot, like where it's like it's like, wow, this is a lot. And so, yeah, it's been kind of the same thing. Just try to do something interesting, try to, add to the conversation. And so that's what I've been working on for the past, several years. So that's been like, going all, I've been near you, I've been where you're based. I've been up there.
Right.
I've been all over the place.
Yeah.
So, that's been a really interesting project as well. And when that's done, then I'll, write something probably on a totally different subject matter. But for me, it's really important to kind of look at Japan from different angles.
Yeah. That's very interesting. That you're writing about these topics that not a lot of people really consider when they think of Japan, So.
Sake. I hope sake. Well, Japanese. Yeah.
Obviously sake, but like whiskey. That was one thing. When I moved here, that I came to realize that Japan actually has a really good whiskey culture, and they have some really, really, really decent whiskey here. So that was a surprise, to be honest, when I first moved here. So.
Yeah, when you moved here, it was a great time to buy a lot of that whiskey, because now it's just the value on it is just.
I've seen bottles I've seen bottles of whiskey run from over $1,000, US, so it's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I hear it's just been going up since, in the past 10 years or so, when a lot more people have been catching on to it. So.
It's so funny. It's you're doing a book on whiskey, you become kind of acclimated to, like, let's say you need to go taste like, Hibiki 30 or something like that. So,
right.
Something that's expensive. And so you get like, okay, this is how much it's going to cost, blah, 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 blah. Or, Nika, the Nika, like 40, like these like really expensive whiskeys, you know what I mean? Yamazaki, right. 25, whatever. And then when you get to like Nihonshu, it's like the stuff that's expensive. I mean, it's still expensive, but like compared to like the expensive like whiskey,
right? If
you're looking at it from just looking at like really expensive like whiskey, suddenly everything's like, wow, this isn't that expensive. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. Or like I was up in like Shiga the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go into this brewery, and talking to the guy that owns it, and he's also the toji there, and he's like, yeah, well, we couldn't hire any more breweries or brewers to come, so it's like now like me and my wife and my son are doing it. So just the three of them are doing it.
Right.
And like so we go through the brewery, and they're doing these like super labor intensive steps during the brewing process. And you're looking at something that's completely, 100% domestic product. And so if you think about like how much, they're not, none of the rice or any of this, it's all, it's all domestic. Everything is domestic. they're doing these, like, some of the steps they were doing in the process. I was like, wow, this is, you guys are, y'all are just, this is really exhausting, especially for like
Exactly.
three of, and then it's like, okay, here, you can get a bottle, 720 milliliter bottle for 1,300 yen. And you're just like, what? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what? You know what I mean? You kind of, it's astounding. It is astounding. I mean, the fact that every single Japanese person isn't drinking sake, that they're drinking chuhai, which is
Right.
made, which is it's industrial alcohol with sugar and flavoring, and
Exactly. Yeah.
they're drinking that instead of this will never cease to blow my mind. I mean, it just, like, I just can't even, I cannot process that, and I know, I've seen how chuhai is made. I know how it's, and it's like,
Mhm.
why wouldn't you drink this? You know what I mean? I just don't get it. It
Yeah.
just blows my
It's
mind.
yeah. It's one of those industries where it's cheap to buy for a reason, because like you said, it's industrially made, but it's that artisan style of nihonshu, sake, or whiskey that really is the the best that you can get here,
Well,
So,
I even like mass produced stuff. Like,
mm,
if it's like nihonshu, I mean, I will futsushi, that's kind of the table sake. I mean, it's just like, even that, you'll go to, like, you'll look at what they're putting in it, and it's like, and then you kind of look at what's being put into, like, canned chuhai, and you're like, I'd still rather have the futsushi. You know what I mean?
right,
And
yeah,
I think it tastes better, and even, like, you'll, like, you'll go into some of these, like, really big breweries, and they're making a lot of table sake, and even then it has more kind of hands-on stuff
right,
than when they're making chuhai. I mean, it's literally like they have these, run it up these huge column stills. They're getting this uh, super pure alcohol, and then it's just like, and that original alcohol is being imported from other countries because
hmm
they want to get it as cheap as possible, and
right,
they purify it here, and they get it really they get it really clean and really pure and a high percentage of alcohol. I don't get it. Like, I really don't get it. But for some, I think it's, I really think that it's the food culture in this country in the past 35, 40 years has really, really changed. And so people want something that's very light, and something that is very sweet or has a kind of a punch and a taste. And then we'll go with, like karage, or, kind of something a bit more fried food, that's easy to drink with that. And that's why they like it. I get it, but I just kind of like,
yeah,
I just, when you really kind of get into the process of how it's made and stuff like that, it's just like, I can't believe it. And I can't, you can go to all these, like, and this isn't like, this brewery isn't kind of an anomaly, where you are, same thing. You can get in your car, probably drive 15, 20 minutes and find some place like that that's doing amazing
oh yeah,
stuff. And,
oh
and
yeah.
so it's,
There's breweries in Nasu and even here in Utsunomiya where I live that
yeah,
yeah, I mean you can just go to and just get you can just get it, So
it's
it's
like,
you're right, yeah,
it's like $13 or $15, and you're like,
exactly.
this is incredible. So, and even if you want to get, like, stuff that's made, from a big, big brewery, even that still, I recommend that in a second over, the kind of the sugary alcohol that seems to be, and kind of enjoyed by so many people today. But
Right,
yeah,
right. So where can people find these books that you've written?
oh, they're all on Amazon.
Okay,
I haven't officially announced. I don't know, the sake book, but I'll probably put up
okay,
stuff on that Twitter at some point in the future. But yeah, they're all on Amazon. There's, I did a book on arcades. I did a book on schoolgirl culture. I did a book on cosplay. I did a book on tattoos and whiskey and sake. And then the next one will be different, and the one after that will be different, and the one after that will be different. So,
Well, good. That's awesome that you cover so many aspects of culture here in Japan that not a lot of people probably think about. Like tattoos, yes, arcades. Those are things that people are interested in, but you also focus on things like the alcohol, like Nihonshu, the sake, and whiskey and things. So those can be found on Amazon, correct?
yeah.
Yeah, and we'll include links to those in the show notes. And what about where can people find you online as well?
Twitter, I guess. I mean, I
Okay.
do Twitter, Instagram, at Brian_Ashcraft, I think, for both. And I write on Kotaku every day. So if you like that site, please read that. Just it's been, I'm sure you feel the same way. I've been here, a chunk of my life now, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's some things that I have a better handle on, but there's some things that I still don't, and I feel like that the rest of my life is that, and I don't think it'll ever. I think if you're ever in a situation where you kind of feel like I understand 100% about this, I think your kind of your motivation to learn more drops. I think you become kind of complacent, and so
Right.
I think living in Japan, I don't think it's possible to feel it. There's always something that you feel like you should study harder or learn more about, or stuff that you didn't know about. So I think that's one of the great things about living here.
Well, cool. Well, Brian, thank you very much for being on today. And any last words to part with the viewers before we end this?
Texas barbecue is best barbecue.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Any recommended spots if people are going to Texas?
Oh, like one? I mean, you just when you go to Texas, eat barbecue. Please eat.
Yeah.
Eat as much as you can, please.
I will vouch for that. Yes.
Please eat barbecue in Texas. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and we'll include all the links to the books and your website and to Kotaku in the show notes. And we appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.